Today, my wife said, "Do you realize tomorrow it will be 3 years since your mother passed away?" She was saying that because to her it seemed as if my mother had been gone for much longer than that. It is not a perspective that I share, but I can empathize with that kind of temporal disjuncture. Sometimes an event far in the past can seem like it happened yesterday, while other events that happened more recently seem as if they occurred a long time ago. I have no expertise in describing why those perceptions can be so peculiar and inconsistent, but they are, and the older I get, and the greater the reservoir of time I have stored in my memory, the more those distortions become evident. However, I've also noticed that for some profound events, that distortion doesn't become more obvious. Instead, its importance loses its significance entirely. I remember when my paternal grandfather, the person whose very name I share, he died unexpectedly when I was only 7 years old. At that time, he was 20 years younger than I am today. He was a complex man with his share of flaws and foibles that most people didn't take to very easily. However, there probably weren't 5 people on the face of the planet that loved me as much as he did. He was raised with a definition of manhood that made little room for any show of affection, let alone any evidence of vulnerability. His default mood was introspective, and it was easy for him to find fault in others, especially those very people who craved his approval most. Those people being, for the most part, his own children. As is often the case with grandfathers, he had a weakness for a grandchild that his own children rarely experienced. I remember once taking to him a cheap pop gun made of pot metal that I had broken irretrievably. It was after dark. He was in his workshop, and I asked him to fix it. He looked at that mangled piece of cheap metal and said, "Cowboy, there's no way anybody could fix that." "But Grandpa," I said, "I thought you could fix anything." He offered no response. He simply took possession of the pop gun and told me to come back the following day. When I returned to his shop, he handed over the now functioning toy. The work he applied to fixing it could best be compared to a brain surgeon bringing back an injured caterpillar from the precipice of death. I later learned that his repair job had cost him most of the night wrestling with tin snips and empty beer cans. Predictably, the following day, that pop gun once again proved itself insufficient to my childish enthusiasms. I told my dad, "No problem, I'll take it to Grandpa." "Don't even think about it," my father declared, quickly tossing it into the trash. "We'll go to the Five and Dime and buy something else. And don't you even say a word to your grandfather." I'm reasonably certain that for any other person, my Grandpa would have made that deposit in the trash can more quickly than my father did. But not long after that, my grandfather died. It was the first time anyone I loved or even knew had died. At the age of 7, I had difficulty grappling with the concept of death. I knew that something bad had happened to him, and that bad thing was making everyone sad. Yet the bad thing I could handle. It was the radical permanence of what had happened that I could not process. For a long time thereafter, the assumption that I could visit him or talk to him would suddenly bubble up in my subconscious. Then my heart would lose its footing, and I'd remember he was gone, and gone forever. Those repeated unhappy instances, far more than the original news of his death, were what I found painful and difficult to comprehend. It took years for me to settle in with the fact of his absence. Well, now back to my wife's difficulty in believing that my mother's been dead for only 3 years. With a passage of nearly 70 years since my grandfather's death, perhaps I've come to process death in a different way. My mother's death doesn't seem like it was 3 years ago, nor does it agree with my wife's sense of something much longer ago than that. I realize I can no longer visit my mom, talk with her on the phone, or go over and play a game of hearts. However, does it seem like she's gone in the same way that my grandfather left my life so long ago, permanently, and with no reprieve from his absence? No, it doesn't feel like that at all. For the most part, it seems as if what was most essential about her is still here, with me. When I think about her, it's not her absence I feel, it's her presence. When my wife talks about her death, it's as if she's talking about my mother's graduation from college or when she moved to North Carolina. Surely, those things were significant, but their memory is not painful. If someone should ask me if I could possibly believe that my mom's graduation from college was only 65 years ago, I'd have to say that was something that I never think about. Perhaps that's because she graduated 65 years ago and has evermore remained graduated. In the same way, after 75 years of living, it's become ever more difficult for me to believe in death. What was most essential about her remains as real for me today as it was when we last sat down and played a game of hearts. I have no problem processing her absence because to me, she isn't absent at all. When a memory of her bubbles up, it's not a source of sadness or regret. Rather, it's a reminder of her integration into the person I've become. I miss her no more than I could miss the fact that my eyes are blue, that I live in America, or that I'm a Catholic. She's incorporated in who I've become in the very same way. Some of my friends, all of whom are old, complain about their aches and pains with the oft-repeated aphorism, "Getting old isn't for sissies." Well, I'd have to say that for me, getting old has had its benefits.